Land that helicopter or you're going to jail. That's what the self-appointed HOA cop yelled as a rescue chopper circled over my pasture to save a kid who wasn't breathing. She waved a plastic badge like it was the Constitution, stepped right into the rotor wash, and dared a pilot to choose between a dying child and her fake authority. 7 minutes later, my front field was drowning in red and blue lights, and the paper crown she wore over our neighborhood cracked straight down the middle. Yeah, that happened. Let me back up a sec, because the fuse for that explosion was lit 3 months earlier on a Tuesday that started out quiet and decent. The kind of morning where coffee tastes like a plan and the sprinkler sounds like forgiveness. I was in the garden with my kids. Miles is 12, Ava is 9, watering the tomatoes my wife Emily planted before we lost her, Texas sun already biting at 8 a.m. cicadas. Warming up like 1,000 little engines when I heard the clack of sensible shoes on my gravel path and a voice that could dull a knife. "Excuse me, sir. Noah Carter. Correct. Clipboard tape measure. Name tag. D. Harrow compliance. And eyes with that flat shine some people get when they discover power in a rule book written by their friends." She said my apple trees violated Section 8.3 of the Sageview Ridge Covenants, over 4 feet near a boundary retroactive no less, because their HOA didn't exist when this house was built, but apparently time runs in reverse when Denise Harrow says it does. I told her we bought the place before any of them showed up, that the trees were older than half the cul-de-sacs, and while I still had wet soil on my hands, she wrote me up like I'd stolen the moon. 48 hours to remove non-compliant vegetation, $500 if I breathed wrong, and her favorite part, expect a comprehensive assessment soon. You know what I mean? That tone people use when they think the whole town is a diorama they get to rearrange. That night I stared at a letter that wasn't just a violation. It was a summons county court, serious planning offenses dressed up in legalese to scare a person into apologizing for being alive. I almost fell for it until I looked at the garden and saw Emily's handwriting on those little plant markers, basil, thyme, cherry tomato, like she'd left a list of things I was required to protect. The next morning I looked up Denise online and found a shrine to property values in petty rage, blurry photos of neighbors' grass, beige swatches held up like holy relics, and then I found the shots of my yard, my kids, the timestamps, the posts about privacy, starts with proper window treatments accompanied by a picture of Ava through her bedroom window. 40-odd likes from people who either didn't read the caption or didn't care what it meant. That's when the anger stopped being about trees. I called the quietest genius I know a neighbor 2 streets over named Darius Lee, an engineer who flies drones for a living and takes care of his grandma, Miss Alma. Darius met me at a coffee shop far enough from Denise's gossip web and pulled up footage from an insurance survey he'd run tiny black dots tucked into trees and lampposts, aiming into yards that belonged to families with kids or seniors or anyone who'd told the HOA no once. That's a network, man, he said, not some Ring doorbell. And when we checked my oak by Ava's window later that night, we found a weathered little eye screwed into the bark, 6-month battery night vision broadcast ready. I held it and thought about how Emily used to tell the kids home is where you're safest, and I felt something inside me lock into place. Denise hadn't just crossed a line, she'd erased it, and I was done being polite. I took the camera and Darius's map to Deputy Ben. Alvarez went to high school with him, decent guy. Steady hands, and he didn't roll his eyes or tell me to calm down. He read the law back to me. Private property recording is a felony here. Each device its own count. Serious money in real time. But then he said what we both knew was true. Denise had made herself useful to certain people, donations here, a favor there, the kind of invisible glue that keeps bad ideas stuck to good offices. "You'll need evidence nobody can talk around," he said. And I nodded because I already knew bullies don't fold unless the whole table flips. Denise must have felt the heat because that evening she blasted the neighborhood with a mass email, 50-something addresses, aerial photos, ours included, nonsense citations stapled to imaginary ordinances painting me as a dangerous little farmer who threatens community security. The last paragraph asked people to report my suspicious nighttime activities to HOA security. HOA security. That's how Trent showed up. Trent Mallory, stocky guy in a thrift store police costume. Crown Vic with decals that came off a printer, a belt full of props, and a face that said he'd been waiting his whole life to stand a little taller than other people. He introduced himself as Chief Security Officer, Enforcement Division, staged a photo shoot in my driveway, and when I asked which agency he worked for, Denise glowed like she'd just wheeled a tank onto Main Street. Sageview Ridge has contracted his firm, she said, and I swear I could hear a kazoo fanfare in her head. 3 days later, Trent blocked an ambulance heading to Darius's house. Miss Alma was having chest pains, demanded to see transport permits, forced paramedics to park 2 blocks away, and carry her on a stretcher through heat and gravel while he preened in his mirror cap. She survived, but a line snapped for a lot of us that day. At the emergency community safety meeting Denise called, she ran a PowerPoint that turned my kid's bicycle into a security threat, my tomato steaks into a hazard, while Trent posed behind her like a mall ninja. In the middle of her speech, a woman I recognized from courthouse days, Judge Elena Park, stood up and asked very evenly what authority they thought they had to spy on private homes and interfere with emergency services. When Trent puffed up and said broad powers under covenant protocols, Judge Park gave him a smile I would frame if I could. Impersonating a police officer is a felony, she said, and blocking an ambulance is federal. And the room got suddenly beautifully quiet. The next morning I woke to yellow tape stretched across my driveway with Crime Scene Sheriff Harrow scrawled on a sign, and instead of fear I felt clarity, because when the villains start playing dress up, the third act is coming. I'd already hired a private investigator, a gravel-voiced old bloodhound named Tom Rourke, and when he called that afternoon he said, "Sit down, Noah." Denise Harrow had another name. Brenda Cole, fired from a security firm for faking certifications, restraining orders from ex-coworkers, a pattern of surveillance and harassment that read like a rough draft of our nightmare. The twist I didn't see coming. Her mother Helen, our HOA treasurer, sweet woman who always brought lemon bars to meetings, whose financial credentials Denise had been using to embezzle money from our community fund, 30,000+ gone in drips and fake invoices. I called Helen that night, voice shaking, and told her what we'd found. She cried, then squared her shoulders right there on the phone. "Tell me what you need," she said. And within days she'd handed over everything. Ledgers, passwords, a hard drive she'd quietly mirrored for months, the whole rotten pipeline. We decided to heal in public. I scheduled an open farm day, invited families to see what we actually did back there. Dirt and sun, and kids learning where food comes from, and for a while it worked. Laughter in the aisles, parents relaxing for the first time in months. Deputy Alvarez brought his 8-year-old Mateo, bright little spark, who wanted to climb the old chicken coop frame for a picture, and I said yes. When I should have said no, the beam gave the structure folded, and the world narrowed to one kid's pale face and a bunch of grown-ups who'd have traded years off their lives to hear him breathe steady again. The 911 dispatcher said the words that make every parent drop to their knees. "Flight for life, inbound, 7 minutes, clear a landing zone," and we did. We moved cars and tied down anything light. We cleared 100-foot square, while Ben did rescue breathing, and I talked to Mateo about the garden like my voice could stitch him together. The helicopter came in low and slow, and that's when Denise walked into the landing path like a traffic cone in a courtroom, badge in the air, hair whipping, screaming about unauthorized airspace and HOA permits, while a pilot circled and a child slid toward blue. I hit live on my phone without thinking, and the parents did too. If there's one thing a bully hates, it's daylight. "He's dying," I yelled, and she stared at me like I was the problem. Dispatch crackled into the pilot's headset, civilian interference, law enforcement en route. And the sound that came next was thunder rolling off flat land, the kind that makes windows remember their hinges. Black SUVs crested my pasture fence like the cavalry. You pray is real and never expect to see tactical team in full kit. A commander with eyes on her plate stepping into chaos and making it small. Step away from the LZ, she told Denise, calm as a metronome. Denise doubled down. I'm the duly elected sheriff of this community, which is something you only say if you've never met a real badge. And when an agent held up her plastic shield and said, "This is a toy from the internet," the parents actually gasped. They moved her aside, the chopper dropped, the medics swarmed, and when the helicopter lifted off with Mateo stabilized and Ben's hand locked around his son's, people were crying and laughing at the same time. Relief is heavy. It has to leave somewhere. Leave. Here's the part nobody in our zip code will forget. While all that was happening in my field, a parallel team hit the HOA clubhouse. Upstairs was the usual laminate and potted plant. Downstairs was a different country, 20 monitors running feeds from hidden cameras, threat tiers, color-coded by last name, license plate logs, and predictive movement charts. A server rack humming behind a false wall next to an equipment room full of tactical toys labeled HOA enforcement. They hauled Trent out in cuffs, still trying to explain how his jurisdiction worked, and started cataloging the rest fake invoices, cash and deposit boxes. A spreadsheet called Clean Sweep that laid out how they'd drive out non-compliant families with noise complaints, liens, and staged incidents. My name at the top with notes about pressure points like my life was a valve they could close. By sunset, the neighborhood didn't feel the same. People who hadn't made eye contact in a year were hugging on the sidewalk. Kids who'd been shushed indoors were racing circles in the parking lot where they'd just watched a costume come off a bully. Denise Brenda went into the back of a federal truck, still arguing about jurisdiction. Trent followed behind her, insisting our HOA outranked the FBI, which would be hilarious if it weren't so sad, and I remember thinking, this is what it feels like when fear gets evicted. 6 months later, I stood where the tomatoes used to be scissors, and Mateo's hand ribbon stretched across a sign that read, "Emily's Garden open to everyone," and I swear the air itself felt lighter. He made a full recovery, turned into a pint-sized celebrity who teaches other kids how to compost like he invented it. Darius bought Trent's old Crown Vic at auction and painted it bright pink for the Children's Parade Justice with a sense of humor, and the government clawed back enough embezzled money to make real amends to a lot of families. Sageview Ridge voted to dissolve the HOA and formed a neighborhood association instead, block parties and tool shares, and a group text for lost dogs. No beige swatch committee, no tape measure patrols, just neighbors being neighbors again. There were other endings, too. Helen, who thought love meant bailing out your grown kid forever, handed over 8 terabytes of records and then went very quiet, the kind of quiet a person uses to rebuild a life. Brick by brick. Judge Park and I grabbed coffee after a hearing and kept grabbing coffee. Miles and Ava adore her because she can explain the Fourth Amendment while showing them how to stake beans. And some afternoons I feel Emily smiling in every kind thing that still grows here. A letter came last week from a coalition I'd never heard of, communities in 3 states, dealing with their own Denise-shaped problems, asking if I'd talk to them about what we did, how we stayed human while fighting hard, how we kept the receipts, how we turned cameras into sunlight. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a dad who didn't back down, like a neighbor who remembered that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. I also feel a little scared, because when you win one fight, the temptation is to go looking for the next. And that's not the point. The point is to make a place where fights aren't necessary, where kids ride bikes, where old ladies prune roses without being graded for fragrance by someone with a clipboard. Still, when I fold that letter and stick it in my jacket, I know which way I'm leaning, toward the messy middle, where people show up for each other, toward the truth that power borrowed from fear always gets repossessed. So if you're asking what was going through my head that day in the field while the wind from a helicopter bent the grass, and a woman with a plastic badge tried to stop a child from living, this was it enough. Enough of pretend authority and weaponized bylaws, and the kind of smallness that dresses up as order enough of people who think the word community means compliance. We proved that sunlight and receipts beat whispers and clipboards, and we proved it together, not because I'm special, but because a lot of ordinary folks got tired at the same time and decided tired wasn't the same thing as done. Now I want to hear you if you were in my boots. Where's the line for you? What's justified? What crosses into plain old abuse? And how do you tell the difference between rules that keep us decent and rules that keep us scared? Drop your take, argue it out. Share the times you pushed back or wished you had, because the next neighborhood watching this might need the courage in your comment to do the right thing. You know what I mean?